Variation is the spice of life, and in video games, this is no different. While we all love a classic spot of punching or shooting, you can't do one thing for too long without growing a little bit bored. This is more or less why mini-games were invented, to keep our ape brains and short attention spans entertained. But sometimes, developers go much further than merely adding mini-games to mix things up a little. Sometimes a fight is added with entirely different mechanics to everything that's come before it in the game, for the sole purpose of adding a little spice to the series. Nobody is safe from this treatment as well, as this genre swapping can even occur at the final boss of the game, leaving you scrambling to learn new controls that you'll literally never need to use ever again. While you don't enter a game hoping for a dance battle or quiz to break things up from your epic fights, you also rarely end up feeling disappointed when they do appear, often because they're so weird that you know you've had an experience you may never forget. I'm Zoe from WhatCulture, and my dumb ape brain has gotten to pop over from the comics channel to talk about 10 unique video game fights that play like nothing else. Number 10, the headless battles. SEKIRO, Shadows Die Twice. Although it's not a game that can be summed up easily, SEKIRO is more or less Dark Souls on steroids. Gone are the days of worrying about getting your shield up, as not only does SEKIRO not have them, but it actively rewards a more aggressive gameplay style, encouraging you to keep close to your enemies, like a little shinobi flea, which is why it's entirely surreal the first time you encounter one of the mini-bosses spread throughout the game known as the Headless. Unlike regular mini-bosses, Headless have an aura around them that slows time down, meaning that everything you've learned about when to block and when to attack enemies goes straight out of the window. They also cause terror, which is a status effect that will murder you dead if the bar completely fills. Without using items to prevent death from terror, and to up your damage to avoid clawing your eyes out at how slow the fight goes, the Headless could be some of the most difficult battles in your entire game. Trust SEKIRO to make the slowest fights they have also some of the hardest. Number 9, the Flower, DRAKENGARD 3. Given that the DRAKENGARD series' bread and butter is sweet sword fights, it's weird that the franchise has made a habit of having its last boss fight be completely different to the rest of the game. In DRAKENGARD 3, the final fight of Branch D sees you trade in your fancy anime blade, and seemingly your ability to attack, in order to play what can only be described as a sudden, unexpected rhythm game. To add a healthy dash of weirdness, said fight is against a series of white statues that should be awfully familiar to you, as one of them is the character you've been playing this whole time, and the rest are her eccentric sisters. Not only is this fight totally different to what you've experienced thus far, it's also devilishly hard, as if you make one single mistake, you'll fail the boss fight. Worse yet, the song you need to match randomly changes several times throughout the boss, leaving you a few seconds to either pick up the new rhythm, or to scream in frustration at your TV as you die for the 7 millionth time. Number 8, the SHREWD Possessor, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. Just before you get to the SHREWD Possessor fight in Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, you feel like you've gotten a handle on the game. You've ghostbusted to your heart's content, enjoyed the puzzles that have been thrown your way, and are happy in the knowledge that this is how the rest of the adventure will play out. After all, what else could possibly happen? Then you reach this boss battle, and suddenly you're in a minecart careening down an icy hill throwing bombs at a ghost. And you suddenly become aware that you may have less of an understanding of how the game is going to play out than you might have initially expected. While there are 2 other cart sections prior to this, presumably to teach you the controls before they throw a screaming ice ghost at you, it can still be difficult to get the fight right, as it requires precision aiming that you never had to think about before. As such, the Angry Icicle can provide a surprising challenge to adjust to, given the whole battle is basically a glorified snowball fight. Number 7, HARUKA SAWAMURA'S Dance-Offs, YAKUZA 5. HARUKA Sawamura should, by all means, be providing some Kill Bill level violence in Yakuza 5. By this point she's been kidnapped twice, almost exploded once, and has survived countless turmoil. She's also the adopted niece/daughter of the player character, who, as you might remember, is part of the Japanese mafia. And yet, when we do play as Haruka, the only battling we engage in is a spirited but friendly dance-off, as the long-suffering girl explores a potential future career as a pop star. These dance competitions occur in a series of Guitar Hero-esque button-mashing moments, complete with Sawamura grooving in the background, as only someone with intense trauma can. As you likely decided to play Yakuza for fights, and only occasionally karaoke, these segments probably come as a little bit of a surprise. But gosh dang it, those songs are catchy enough that by the end you simply won't care. Number 6, the Red Demon, GEIST. As one of the single weirdest games that existed on the GameCube, it's not exactly shocking that GEIST liked to change up its fights every now and then. Though the game flits between being a first-person shooter and a stealth game at rapid speed, it decides to mix things up one more time in your final fight against the unnamed Red Demon. At this point, it seems as though the developers decided to just see how wild they could make this final experience, as it becomes a space shooter, complete with an entirely new set of controls. There's something hilariously messed up about a controls tutorial showing up in the last boss of a game, but then, if you've played that far into GEIST, you likely wouldn't be all that surprised. Number 5. The Bat Tank Stealth Sections. Batman Arkham Knight. If you had to say two types of gameplay that are polar opposites, you'd likely feel pretty safe saying that controlling a tank and being stealthy are two very different things. But the developers of Arkham Knight scoffed at this concept. No, they said, tanks are the height of stealth, and so a portion of the game was created where you stealthed around in a great big tank against other tanks. Weirdly, it's never directly addressed in-game just how surreal this is, despite the fact that, at some point in development, someone must have raised the question of why exactly hide-and-seek with two huge heavy metal vehicles had been implemented. It's still a good game overall, but there's a reason that the phrase "sneaky like a tank" doesn't exist. And there's a reason why this is many fans' least favourite section of the game. Number 4. The Death Road of Despair. Danganronpa v3, Killing Harmony. It cannot be overstated that the entirety of Danganronpa v3, and indeed most of the series, is a visual novel game, where you attempt to solve a series of murders done by your increasingly manic classmates. It's sort of like Phoenix Wright, if Phoenix Wright was a game about a bunch of high school students with pink blood and low self-esteem. And that's all it's supposed to be, as the game is one that's intended to challenge your mind more than your reaction times. So it comes totally out of left field when, all of a sudden, the game changes into a tough-as-nails platformer during the Death Road of Despair. You're left fighting against all of Monokuma's traps in order to try and escape the school you've been trapped inside of. As it turns out, you're also fighting against Monokuma himself, as the villainous little toy bear turns out to have been watching your attempt to flee the whole time, and controlling the bombs that will no doubt straight up murder all of your characters. At the end, you'll no doubt be happy to go back to simply inspecting murders, which is maybe the reason the Mario Kaiser ripoff was created in the first place. Number 3. ALPHYS. Undertale. As a game that doubles in a lesson on morality, Undertale can be played in one of two ways, either as a conventional RPG where you kill everyone you meet, or an unusual RPG where you befriend everyone you meet, consequently never leveling up. Every single fight in Undertale is chock full of surprising mechanics and charming quirks as a result of this, but one stands out amongst the rest, because Dr. ALPHYS, the shy lizard woman you meet halfway through the game, doesn't actually fight you, but rather lurks in the background as her deranged robot sidekick busts into her room Kool-Aid Man style, and then forces you into a quiz. It all plays out in exactly the same way a regular fight would, but without any of the actual combat elements you've at this point come to expect. Instead, you're treated to a series of interesting questions such as, would you smooch a ghost? To which there is only one answer, heck yeah. Though you do duke it out with the Robo-Pop star later on, this is one fight where you won't see a single punch thrown your way, although you will get electrocuted should you goof up any of your answers. Number 2, the last HIGGS fight, Death Stranding. By the time you reach your final fight with HIGGS, you'll have faced down the coal-wearing killer a fair few times. Usually, however, HIGGS is using his powers to send some BT beastie your way, whereas this time, it's just you and him. Without his spectral sidekicks, Troy Baker's imaginary alter ego is rendered significantly less imposing, and significantly more punchable. And with a very different type of boss battle, comes some very different methods of defeating him. In HIGGS' first phase, all you have to do is throw some of the conveniently scattered parcels at him to stun him, before following that up with a couple punches of your own. After that, it's time to play cowboy, as you hog-tie the rampaging lunatic until he learns to settle down a little. Or rather, to settle down enough that he stops using his knife and starts using his fists, as the third phase changes the game to a classic punch-out, similar to that of Snake's fight against Liquid in Metal Gear Solid 4. Because every single climatic fight made by Kojima eventually becomes two guys punching each other out in a weird environment. Number 1, RAFE ADLER, Uncharted 4. If there's one rule that video games should follow, it's that if you can put a sword fight in your game, you must. Even in franchises where it shouldn't work. After Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games let us have folks like Donkey Kong and Yoshi fence, nobody has an excuse to not sneak in one classic sword fight somewhere into their series. And Uncharted 4 snuck in one classic sword fight in spectacular style, having Nathan Drake and his rival Rafe Adler face off against one another at the end of the game, not with guns as you'd expect, but rather in a tasteful duel. While the fight is largely just button prompts, you do get an element of genuine swordplay in some moments, as you carefully deflect Adler's attacks before getting in some of your own. It's a much more fitting battle than just another cover-based shooter moment, as the scene would have significantly less impact where you just sat at opposite corners of the room firing at one another. And that's our list. I've been Zoe from WhatCulture, and you can find me either at WhatCulture Comics, being a big old nerd, or on Twitter at Zemascal, which is just the worst to spell. I'm so sorry. I never thought about the fact that one day people might have to actually try and spell it. Thanks for watching.